Top 10 U.S. states that could join Canada. The U.S. and Canada are two great neighbors bound by history, trade, and more than 5,000 miles of the longest undefended border in the world. But what if that border wasn't as permanent as we think? Imagine this. What if some U.S. states, fed up with Washington politics or drawn to Canada's stability, decided to break away? Sounds crazy, right? Well, maybe not, because several U.S. states already have deep economic, cultural, and even political ties to Canada. And if current trends continue, this idea might not be so far-fetched after all. So today, we're asking, could these American states actually join Canada? Let's join the global lens as we count down the 10 states most likely to make the move north and the reasons behind this quiet shift. Number 10. Vermont, the rebel with a maple soul. Vermont is a small state, but full of character. It's known for maple syrup, historic wooden bridges, and a progressive political spirit where Bernie Sanders is seen as a cultural icon. But did you know that Vermont was once an independent country? From 1777 to 1791, Vermont did not belong to the United States or any other nation. It had its own government, its own currency, and even its own constitution, one of the first documents in America to ban slavery. And when it joined the Union in 1791, not everyone in Vermont supported the move. Traces of that independent spirit still exist today, most clearly seen through a movement called the Second Vermont Republic, which advocates for leaving the United States to form an independent country or even to join Canada. Why Canada? Because Vermont's values like universal health care, environmental policies, cooperative economics, and a socially progressive outlook align more with Canada than with Washington. And that's not all. Vermont also has deep economic ties with the province of Quebec. They share a border, French-Canadian cultural roots, and hundreds of millions of dollars in trade every year. So if one day Vermont decides to leave the United States, don't be surprised if it looks north and asks to join the Canadian Federation, a new Quebec in the heart of America. It may sound crazy, but Vermont's history has always been anything but ordinary. Number 9. Maine, Power of the North. If you've ever been to Maine, you'll understand right away. This place feels distinctly northern. Cold winds from the Atlantic, dense pine forests, and coastal villages that resemble scenes from Canada more than New York or Boston. But the connection goes beyond just the landscape. Maine depends on Canada too. Keep the lights on. Most of Maine's electricity comes from Hydro-Quebec, one of Canada's largest power companies, which generates clean energy from hydropower. Each year, billions of dollars in trade flow between Maine and eastern Canadian provinces like New Brunswick and Quebec. Culturally, Maine has many French-speaking communities descended from the Acadians, sharing a history with what is now Canada. The slower pace of life, closeness to nature, and strong sense of community resemble Canada's maritime provinces more than the rest of the U.S. History also supports the idea of breaking away. Maine was once part of Massachusetts, but split off and became its own state in 1820, a clear precedent for separation if necessary. So if Maine once had the courage to leave Massachusetts, who's to say it couldn't do the same with the United States? And this time, the destination might not be independence, but a more stable home in the North, Canada. Number 8. New Hampshire, Freedom, or Join Canada. New Hampshire is famous for its motto, live free or die. And it's not just words. This state has no sales tax, no personal income tax, and a deeply independent political tradition. People here value self-determination, small government, and less interference more than anywhere else in the United States. In fact, in 2022, a group of state legislators proposed a constitutional amendment to secede from the United States. In terms of trade, New Hampshire does over $8 billion in trade with Canada each year, Products ranging from wood and machinery to pharmaceuticals regularly cross this border. In terms of lifestyle, nature lovers in New Hampshire live in a way that closely resembles the people in provinces like Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, hiking, camping, biking, and growing their own food. A self-reliant lifestyle is something valued on both sides of the border. So if the U.S. sinks into instability and the people of New Hampshire feel their value of true freedom is under threat, they might look north to a place where similar values are still preserved. And in that scenario, the motto, "Live free or die," might just become, "Live free and become a part of Canada." Number 7. Minnesota, cold weather but warm love. Minnesota and Canada share a nearly 900-kilometer border, along with over $7 billion in annual trade. But this relationship isn't just about economics, it's a blend of culture, lifestyle, and history. Think of ice hockey, months of snow, thick wool sweaters, and a gentle, calm way of speaking. Minnesota and provinces like Manitoba or Ontario share striking similarities. Before officially joining the United States in 1858, parts of Minnesota were under the control of British and Canadian fur trading companies like the Hudson's Bay Company. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, many towns in the northern part of the state had strong ties to settlements across the border. Today, some Minnesota residents still hold dual U.S.-Canadian citizenship, and many families frequently visit each other, as if the border were just a faint line. Ideologically, Minnesota leans toward moderate politics, community-based values, and social welfare systems values that align closely with modern-day Canada. So, if the United States were to enter a major crisis, would Minnesota, with its heart already long connected to the north, be one of the first places to consider a new life under the red maple leaf? Number 6. North Dakota, the unofficial Canadian province. North Dakota may not often make headlines, but when it comes to its relationship with Canada, the two are almost under one roof. Canada is North Dakota's #1 trading partner, with over $6 billion in goods exported each year. Agricultural, energy, and industrial products from the state are regularly found in central Canadian provinces, especially Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But the connection doesn't stop at economics. Many towns in North Dakota rely on healthcare and services from Canada, where the public healthcare system is more efficient and less costly. In border regions like Pembina or Bodino, Canadian license plates appear just as frequently as American ones. Ideologically, North Dakota tends to lean conservative, valuing free enterprise and small government, interesting parallels with the province of Alberta, which has been known for its own movement to separate from Canada in favor of a model more like a U.S. state. Notably, in the past, there was even an idea to form a North Dakota-Manitoba Economic Union. While it never materialized, it shows one thing. People here are not unfamiliar with thinking beyond national boundaries. So if American politics were to become unstable, or if people started looking for a more stable model, could North Dakota turn to the north and officially become part of Canada? Number 5. Montana, the highland land with Canadian spirit. Montana, where vast prairies meet the towering Rockies. A wide, wild, and very peaceful land. But few people know that Montana and Canada share a much deeper connection than many might think. Montana borders 3 Canadian provinces, British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. All 3 share agricultural and mining cultures, as well as political ideologies that are very similar to Montana's. Each year, billions of dollars in trade pass through these border crossings, from cattle and grains to heavy machinery. Residents on both sides cross like neighbors to shop, visit family, or even receive medical care in Canada. Unlike bustling urban states, Montana has a slower pace of life, surrounded by nature and a community that values self-reliance, tranquility, and environmental conservation. Do those 3 values sound familiar? There are also core values in many parts of Canada, especially Alberta and British Columbia. There are small towns in northern Montana that accept the Canadian dollar. Some rural areas broadcast Canadian television and listen to CBC radio daily. And many families here have relatives across the border. One day, you might drive through Montana and realize you've entered Canadian territory without needing to change anything but your license plate. If things go south, don't be surprised if Montana looks north instead of east. Number 4. Washington, the state of freedom looking north. Next, we come to Washington, a state in the far northwest of the United States, famous for Starbucks coffee, tech giants, and an atmosphere always scented with pine. But behind that modern image, there's a lesser-known truth. Washington is not just a neighboring state to Canada. It is one of the states most deeply connected to Vancouver, British Columbia economically, culturally, and ideologically. That's right, Vancouver is just over a 2-hour drive from Seattle. In fact, the I-5 cross-border highway is one of the busiest trade routes between the US and Canada. Each year, billions of dollars in goods, from technology and agricultural products to financial services, are exchanged between the two. Many Washington residents work in Canada, or vice versa. People on both sides move back and forth as if living in one giant metropolitan area, where national borders gradually become blurred. Politically, Washington is considered one of the most progressive states in the U.S., with eco-friendly policies, a developed social welfare system, and a strong spirit of liberalism. Sound familiar? That's Canada and especially British Columbia, where ideas about clean energy, public health care, and personal freedom align completely with what Washington is striving for. Some people refer to the Seattle, Vancouver area as Cascadia, a cross-border ecological and cultural region where geographical boundaries are merely secondary details. Now imagine a scenario. The U.S. falls into chaos, economic crisis, political polarization, a weakened federal government. Would Washington, with its strong independent economy, strategic location, and self-reliant mindset, wait for Washington, D.C. to fix everything, or turn northward in search of a more stable future? From Starbucks to environmental policy, Washington already shares more in common with Canada than with much of the rest of the U.S. And who knows, one day, you might see a sign saying "Welcome to Washington" written in both English and French. Number 3. Oregon, the land of rebellion with an Arctic heart. If there is one state in the U.S. that constantly asks itself, do we really belong to America? It's Oregon. This is the land of revolutionaries, passionate nature lovers, and citizens who never fully trust the federal government. For decades, Oregon has been known as a quirky state, but in the best way possible. Oregonians love the environment, hate plastic waste, ride bikes instead of driving cars, and are willing to protest Washington, D.C. if they feel it's unjust. Oregonians were early supporters of the right to use cannabis. They also push for clean energy, strict gun control, and talk about universal basic income and universal health care, as if they are already living in Canada. The political mindset, culture, and even the economic model in Oregon are increasingly more similar to Canada than to the U.S. And there's another important thing. Oregon is becoming geographically and economically closer to British Columbia, especially Vancouver. Oregon has planned to build a high-speed rail line through Cascadia, connecting Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. In the past decade, movements like Cascadia Now have emerged, calling for the creation of an independent nation separate from the U.S., with Oregon as one of the central hubs. And if you ask young people in Portland, Eugene, or Bend which government they would prefer to live under, some would not hesitate to answer. I choose Canada. As political storms continue to rise in Washington, D.C., Oregon, with its rebellious heart and green vision, may look northward to build a future aligned with the ideals they believe in. They've often been ahead of the US in many bold decisions. Who knows, the next time, they might be the first to leave the US. Number 2. Alaska. The frontier ready to turn its back on the continent. Welcome to Alaska, the land of ice, wilderness, and questions that have never had a clear answer about its true identity. It is farther from Washington, D.C. than Canada. In fact, Alaska is closer to Russia and Vancouver than to any major U.S. city. Alaska is a resource-rich but isolated state. Oil is its economic lifeblood, but it heavily relies on pipelines through Canada and sea or air trade routes over Canada to connect with global markets. There are communities in Alaska where the only way out of town is to drive through Canada. They are used to crossing the border daily, as if it weren't a border at all. Alaska has a very strong indigenous identity, with many Inuit, Yupik, and Aleut communities sharing origins and culture with indigenous groups in Canada. Many ask questions like, what do we gain by being part of the United States? Is there a better option? In recent years, there have been surveys showing that some Alaskans support the idea of becoming an independent nation or even joining Canada if it helps protect the environment, improve welfare, or preserve their distinct identity. With its abundant resources, strong indigenous culture, and strategic location near the Arctic, Alaska is a potential piece for Canada in the 21st century. If one day the United States faces a major crisis in politics, climate, or economy, Alaska would be one of the first states independent enough to make its own decision. Alaska once belonged to Russia. Then it became part of the US. And one day, who knows? Number 1. Michigan. The bridge to Canada has begun. Michigan, an industrial state with a long history, a symbol of the automobile, American labor, but also the gateway to Canada. With a border spanning hundreds of miles, with bridges and tunnels crossing rivers connecting the two countries, Michigan is not only close to Canada, it has been closely tied to Canada economically, culturally, and in everyday life. Let's talk about trade. Detroit, the heart of America's automotive industry, is just one bridge away from Windsor, Ontario's manufacturing hub. Every day, more than 10,000 trucks cross the Ambassador Bridge, carrying components, cars, and goods worth billions of dollars. Politically and socially, Michigan increasingly shares more similarities with Canada than with some southern U.S. states. From environmental protection views to healthcare and public education, the people of Michigan are leaning more toward the Canadian model, stable, equal, and somewhat more moderate. In this list, Michigan is the only state where the question, if we joined Canada, where would we start, already has an answer. From the Ambassador Bridge. And if one day the U.S. truly faces a crisis in politics, society, or the economy. Vermont is a small state, but from all the factors, geography, economy, people, ideas, no other state in the U.S. is as close to Canada in every aspect as Michigan. And if the U.S. flag no longer flies in Lansing, the red maple leaf could very well be ready to be raised. If you find this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell because coming up, we will explore scenarios of U.S. disintegration, secession states, and futures no one expects but are entirely possible.